Good afternoon. It's 22 for this June 25th, 2021. Hello, I am your host, Gregory T. Roberts. Welcome. Welcome to the show. There is so much news happening, but um, thank you for listening or watching on WVS 103.7, or are you watching on M106, or if you're on the road on WVS 103.7. Thank you for listening and taking part. Today's weather and the weather for the rest of the week, just stick your hand outside and you'll get it wet. Friday, 100% chance of rain, high of 77, low of 70. Saturday, 90% chance of rain, high of 75, low of 63. Sunday, 60% chance of rain, high of 75, low of 63. Monday, 40% chance of rain, high of 79 and 61. Until next Monday, they're just saying rain, partly cloudy, chance of rain every day. So if you got activities out there, make sure you make a plan too. Um, if you want to take part of this show today, make sure you go to M106 or WVS 103.7 The Beat Facebook sites, and you can take part with questions with our guests. There's so much news today. We might break. We're waiting for the Minneapolis former police officer Derek Chavez is being sentenced today. Also, the president is speaking about what's happening in Orlando. If you don't know, a building collapsed. People are trapped. Many are dead. Our heart and our prayers are going out to the families, the people trapped, and the first responders, the police, and for the firefighters, EMTs that are risking themselves to try to get those people free. The problem with that is when they peel off one layer, they get fires, further collapse. So keep your hearts sensitive to what is going on. Today is part 2 of the series about employment issues. What's going on with and why there's so many jobs available. I passed McDonald's, 2 of them, and I saw $15 an hour at McDonald's at both locations. And then here's the other question. Why aren't people applying for jobs? And many more questions as well. Last week, you guys blew up the lines with a lot of questions. We want you to do it again. To help us figure out what's going on, we had Brittany. I want to thank you for Michigan Works. West Michigan Works last week did an excellent job to talk about it from several sides. Today's guest, he serves as the director of economic development of the city of Muskegon. Put your hands together for Jake Ekholm. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. Good afternoon.
First of all, I want to tell you thank you for being here, and also let you know you have an open invitation to keep us update what's happening with the city.
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah, we really try lots of different ways of outreach, and I've always had a good relationship with the guys, PA and Big Rob at 103.7 from my days in Muskegon Heights, and yeah, I'd love to be a more regular presence to keep you guys updated.
Okay, great. So let's break the glass and get rid of the smoke on this issue. I want to find out from your perspective because you're coming from a different angle. You guys have to hire. You guys have to deal with budgets. You have to deal with fulfilling positions and all kinds of things. And I wanted to get your opinion on what do you feel what's going on.
For sure. So, just economic development, when done best, is very data driven. So, if it'd be okay with that, start with some numbers.
Absolutely. We want
Yeah,
facts.
and So a lot of folks probably have already looked at, the May jobless report, which was positive. So you may remember the April jobless report. The administration, as well as some other folks in political positions, kind of got slammed because there was only just under 300,000 jobs added, and that was far under the projections. But May bounced right back. I believe in May there was 559,600 jobs added, which is a strong jobs report. So me in economic development, the first thing I look at after I see a strong jobs report is, okay, well, that can be a little misleading. And usually, like, if it's a news ticker or a news cycle or it's on your radio, and you're getting a little news update, that's the only number they'll reference. They'll say, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said that, jobless claims decreased by this amount and that the economy created X amount of jobs. But there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes with those numbers. So the next factor that I always take a look at is the labor force participation rate. And so what that means is folks that have been in the labor force and have left the labor force for whatever reason, whether it's personal or whether they've given up on trying to find a job. The Bureau of Labor Statistics also tracks that. So the good news in May that we saw is that the labor force participation rate held relatively steady. It's still about 1.8 percentage points down from where it was pre-pandemic, which means almost 2% of all the labor force has left the labor force and not come back. And that can be for a lot of different reasons, which we can get into on the show. But long story short, the adding of 560,000 jobs is a very strong jobs report. It indicates that people are coming back to work. Just for this show, because I know we have a diverse audience in the Muskegon community, I pulled some of the numbers that kind of look over that, because the other thing BLS does is they break workers in the labor force down by major worker groups. So the place where unemployment rates really decline. So the people that are attaining these jobs, the biggest group that was the largest gainer of jobs was actually teenagers, which was interesting. And you can tie that to, school being out and people getting summer jobs. White workers and Hispanic workers. Jobless rates for adult men and adult women, and then Black workers and Asian workers showed little change in May. So it's really the white cohort of the labor force, the Hispanic cohort of the labor force, and then by age, teenagers actually made up the biggest job gains in the last month. So that's kind of where the numbers are at. As far as us at the city, getting back to like your original question, yeah, we are constantly, we're an organization of just under 240 people. So we're consistently filling jobs and consistently posting openings. We've been fortunate that we've had quite a bit of growth in certain areas. So we've been hiring, in the event planning areas because we're taking on some of the city's festivals that used to be put on by other entities. And so yeah, we've been fortunate that so far we've seen a lot of internal movement, people moving between departments, which has helped us keep our knowledge base in the city. And we've been fortunate to fill most of the positions we posted. The ones we tend to have the hardest time with, and this will come as no surprise, are the ones that are like part-time positions.
So the part-time and seasonal.
Oh yeah, and then seasonals. You hit the nail right on the head. So actually, the city just approved at the last commission meeting a contract with the Youth Employment Program, which is actually being put on through Community Encompass, I believe, in partnership with Michigan Works, who was your previous guest at last week's show. And so we will be utilizing local youth in the community to fill a lot of our seasonal positions this year in public works, which will be great job experience for them. And I think, pretty good wages for a teenager. I think we're up in well over $12 an hour.
Jake, why do you think the numbers are still stagnant or about the same when it comes down to minorities?
Yeah, so historically speaking, especially the Black community has always had the highest overall unemployment rate, and that's because of all kinds of systemic and baked in, policies in finance and real estate and education, and we can have a 6-hour show on that. But right. I will tell you, yeah, and that's something that we study carefully in our department as we're working on principles of economic equity is what we call it. So the reason is folks in some of those cohorts were already making lower wages before the pandemic hit, and so some people are surmising, some economists, is that there's two things working against those cohorts. One is that the jobs in those areas where they predominantly worked and lived are going to come back slowest because there's less economic activity in those areas. And then the other part is that the federal unemployment subsidy and the state, whatever state they're in, whatever state unemployment subsidy they're still achieving, goes further for them because statistically speaking, the cost of living and their previous wages were lower in the first place. So, so those folks that are in those minority communities that are middle class or, were making at least like higher living wages beforehand, they likely are already back to work. And it's primarily the folks that make up some of our lower wage jobs, which were again disproportionately filled by minority workers. They're kind of the last ones coming back. And you mentioned earlier at the intro of the show, like, why is that? And I think part of it is an understanding that during the pandemic, there was these stimulus bills and this unemployment. In some cases, the unemployment paid more than what people were making before, and people have really politicized that, have made that a very political issue. We shouldn't be paying people more to sit at home. Well, and I think the conversation from most of the economic folks that I follow is, well, maybe we should have been paying those people more in the first place, and they'd be more incentivized to come back to work. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're seeing is the market is starting to reflect that, and you're starting to see folks, signing bonuses, starting off $2 plus higher than previous temp rates. I remember several years ago, I was at an industrial entity in one of the communities that I serve, and they told me that they started people at like $11 an hour on temp, like they were like proud of that. And in my head, I'm like, well, I just visited in the last week like 4 other places, and they're all paying higher than that, and a lot of them are direct hiring. And so, like, mm-hmm. We had to kind of be frank and say, like, yeah, that's not going to get you who you're looking for. It's not going to get you the workers. So I think finally, you're seeing upward pressure on wages. And one of the things I was really worried about during COVID was, we were just starting to see this progress, and I was worried that the economic conditions post-COVID or at the end of COVID would actually push that back down, and we'd have to start all over. But I think you're kind of seeing the opposite. I think you're seeing a lot of the labor force not being incentivized to come back without, experiencing more of what really was a living wage, which a lot of them were getting that they didn't get before due to the unemployment subsidy and the stimulus.
Well, and you guys, you have to face changing in wages as well. If you take what the fire department averages about roughly $11 an hour, something like that, and then people are working there and leaving and going to better pay. So you guys are doing some adjusting well. When I was talking to the chief a couple months ago.
Yeah. So the fire thing, the averaging $11 an hour is always sort of a misnomer, and that is accurate. That's true. But I think most of the time their schedules are built on like 48 or 50 plus hour weeks because they have 24-hour shifts. Right. So I think it makes it sound like they're making $20,000 a year when in reality that's not true. But so yeah, but that being said, I know they're working right now with the police officers union, which is not my role, so I'm not going to comment in depth on it. But I do know that we're trying to be more competitive with wages. We're trying to make sure, we're already one of the bigger entities in the region, but we don't want to train guys up and lose them to Grand Rapids or Wyoming, and we don't want to train capable staff in any department and then lose them to another entity, because that's so much. It's actually, there's been lots of job studies and labor studies that show it can cost up to 10 times more to train a new person than to retain an existing staff member.
I think you said it very well, that it is not only one department, it's all departments, to find someone that's quality, pay that person, train them, and then have that person leave and go somewhere else. You just lost time invested in that person.
Yeah, that's a drastic drain of resources, and then the institutional knowledge that person achieves while they're on the job, right? So a lot of us have worked jobs where, you get a degree or you get some sort of technical training, and you get there on the job, and there's a lot of stuff that they didn't teach you, and you just got to figure it out by talking to people and doing the work. And so, that's what we call institutional knowledge, and we don't want to lose that whenever we can avoid it.
If you are watching or listening, join in the conversation, post your questions or comments to Jake, and he will be sure to answer the questions best to his ability. Now, Jake, you talked about a little bit about the job force of people that have just quit. Mm-hmm. Slowly, they say some of those people are coming back. Do you think we will ever solve that problem?
So that's a big question. Just you're putting me on the spot there, Greg. That's a big one. So, I'll start at the beginning and I'll work my way to it.
Take your time.
Yeah. So definitely, labor force participation is a complicated animal. So it's sitting at about and people are shocked when they hear it. So the labor force are folks that are of working age that could be working in the United States. They don't have a disability. They don't have some other proclivity that keeps them from in the labor force.
Mhm.
And that participation rate, in May was 61.6%. So that
Mhm.
really means that just over 6 out of 10 people that could be working if they chose to are. Now, there's all kinds of little different circumstances that can pull people out of there. But it's still low. And so in Muskegon County, we already had a lower than average labor force participation rate than the country. So we were already in the high 50s. And so
Mhm.
we estimate that we're probably still sitting around the high 50s. So the participation rate right now, against February of 2020, where it was still struggling. So everybody was really focused on that really low, unemployment rate. And so I was having conversations in February of 2020, in all of 2019 too. How do we import labor? We got to get people to come here and take these jobs because all of our companies are growing. And if we
Right.
can't supply them the labor force they need, then we are going to lose these companies, or these companies
Mhm.
are going to continue. They're not going to continue to grow. Uh,
Mhm.
so those were the pre-COVID conversations, and I estimate we're going to get back to those. But right now, the labor force participation rate is only 1.7% lower than it was in February of 2020. So this was a problem before then. As to why that's the case, there's lots of different reasons. Again, one of them being that wages have not kept up with inflation over the last roughly 4 decades. And so even though, wages are ticking up higher, minimum wages are ticking up higher, people pay a lot of attention to that figure. They're actually lower when adjusted for inflation. So working class jobs, frontline jobs, don't pay the bills the way they used to. And
I,
so, oh,
Jay, can I get you to just repeat what you just said? Because a lot of people don't understand that the minimum wage, has not kept up with what's going on.
yeah, yeah. So that's absolutely accurate. And it's not just minimum wage; it's most wages. So most income levels and brackets have not kept up with inflation, especially the minimum wage. So the minimum wage has not been a living wage in a long time. And if you look at the original Fair Labor Standards Act legislation and other legislation that led to a federal minimum wage, the intent was to have a minimum living wage for working people. So that's stuff that we look at in our office. We're a city government. It's not our job to take political stances on these types of issues, but
Right.
there are diagnosable problems in the local economy, and that's something that our business partners in the community, the folks that are hiring people, are seeing. And we're starting to see as you mentioned, those signs you're seeing outside businesses, they're very competitive offers, and I think that's what it's going to take to get the labor force to come back.
Now, how is the city doing? I know we talked about temporary. How are you guys doing in filling the temporary jobs? I know that was a struggle, but how are you guys doing?
Yeah, yeah. So I think with this latest contract, we're going to see pretty close to what we want as far as our seasonal and temporary DPW guys. And then I know like the public safety department has done a fantastic job of like putting together different citizens academies, finding local folks to go through police academy or go through fire academy. So I think we've been pretty proactive. And again, I don't want to take any credit for that because it's not my departments, but like I've watched and I've worked with these guys that are doing this, these other department heads, and they're doing a really good job staying ahead of some of these issues. And then again, our wages at least are all living and more competitive than maybe some of those frontline jobs we're talking about.
Okay. Michael Smith from Texas. How you doing, Michael? Municipality employees are not motivated by wages, but stability and worker benefits. I worked over 28 years in city government, Houston. Stability, job security was the main reason for staying. What do you think of that comment?
Yeah, I think that's a perspective for sure. I would say there's a lot of nuance in that comment. So stability, that was the historical mantra: public sector versus private sector. Private sector you could go after higher wages, and do more, maybe some more dynamic stuff. But public sector, there was stability and benefits, and it was what people used to call like the safe job, right?
Mhm.
So that's true. But a lot of things have changed over the last 28 years. When it comes to public employment. One of which is pension funds all over the country, not just in Michigan, all over the country, are not working because property taxes, local income tax, all these other places where cities draw revenue have not kept up with inflation and the cost of goods and services and the cost to do business and operate a city. And so what that means is that cities have had to cut the number of employees that they employ, and that means there's fewer people paying into those pensions. And so over the course of time, those systems have broken down. Also, they have not, there's other stuff. There's back end problems. A lot of those pension funds haven't achieved the returns that they, forecast that they would. I'm part of MERS, but I don't have a pension. I have a defined contribution plan. So what that does is, most public pensions, you had to be there for 10 years before you were vested, which meant to get the city's portion of their contributions, you had to be there for a decade minimum. And so that's kind of gone by the wayside. A lot of cities can't afford those pension funds anymore. So what they're doing is they're increasing their wages to be more competitive with the private sector up front. And then they're getting lower cost retirement plans on the back that also are more reminiscent of the private sector. So I would agree with the commenter that, yeah, stability is super important in the public sector. And there's other things that provide that. Like public sector is still by far the largest union sector. Most public sector employees in Michigan, at least, are represented by a union. So that adds a lot of stability. Even ones that aren't, there's a civil service, which is a protective committee of environment. Yep.
Definitely it's protected by the charter.
Yep, exactly. So there's civil service here in Muskegon, which is a great benefit to employees and provides a lot of stability. So there are factors there. But one of the biggest things was like, yeah, we'll take the lower wages, but I'm going to be able to retire at 50 and I'm going to have this pension that's going to pay my entire life. And that's not the reality for folks that are my age and younger that are entering public service. I've worked in public service for 8 years now, and I've not had a pension. So my point being, the environment changes. I agree with what the commenter said, but over the course of time, cities and other organizations have to adjust to make themselves competitive with changing conditions.
So how's the city doing right now? Are you guys looking for employees right now? Are you guys stable enough right now?
We're pretty stable. We've had a couple of new positions created, primarily, I think, in the clerk's office. There was a new event planner position. They're interviewing for that right now. But, we're pretty stable. I think we've reached sort of an equilibrium of operations in most departments. The only reason I feel comfortable saying that is because we have these department head meetings where people get in depth about their operations. I think we feel pretty good. We're certainly not losing anybody. And as we have been hiring, we've been fortunate to get quality candidates.
To me, I'm going to say something, and you, Jake, you don't have to respond to this. There are too many groups out there that should be filling the space in the void. The city shouldn't have to be planning so many events or taking over events. So they now have to hire a coordinator because other groups have gave up the events or not stepping up. So that's my editorial. And Jack, you don't have to touch that one.
Oh, and yeah, I don't think I really have a position per se. So thanks for giving me that out. But it seems like each time that happens, there's legitimate reasons where like whatever group had it on before, conditions change as I just mentioned. And so the city has to make that choice. Does this provide the community value necessary that we want to keep it? We want to take it on as a municipal operation. And so far, the answers to those have been yes. And to the credit of those groups and those people that work on those, a lot of the same people are still volunteering and helping. They're just coming to a different meeting.
Right.
So yeah, and I think we have such a good, vibrant spectrum of community festivals and events. The Lakeshore Art Festival is this weekend, and it's one of the largest art festivals in the country. So, we can't. It's not an easy decision to see a group struggling and not step in when you're a community that values creating those opportunities for people.
But it's a great opportunity for organization to pick up some of these activities to help the city, help the county, and help their organization. It's a lot of those kind of activities that are happening that the city is taking over. It's not like the city is saying, give me those. It's like you guys are being handed these things to make sure that they run and run proficiently.
Yeah, exactly. We want to make sure they survive. And when folks, run into hardships, we've fortunately had good relationships with those groups, and they've come and been candid, and we've managed to take those on and again, still partner with most of the same players. It's just a matter usually of like capacity. So, and I think just as a caveat, that event coordinator person in the clerk's office does a lot of different stuff. It's not that they're only doing these big events. So I do want to add that caveat.
That's okay. So let's break down this job thing again, and really get down. You had some great numbers. I want to go deeper into those numbers. So What do you say to the individual, according to your numbers, that say that a lot of people are just staying home just to collect unemployment?
Oh yeah, no, it's not that simple. And I've had that conversation with lots of folks. So one of my primary roles is to deal with business owners, and we have great business owners. They, it's not their job to interpret that data; it's mine. And so, they can only see what's in front of them, which is, hey, I'm hiring. I'm hiring at higher than I was before, and I'm still not getting people. So I've heard about all these subsidies. It must be the problem. And really, it's not that simple. So that is a factor. I think anybody would be naive to say that's not a factor. I actually referenced it earlier. Some people were working, two part-time jobs to, two $11 an hour jobs, and they face the choice of having to go back to that or making about the same amount of money on their state and federal unemployment, some of which has run out, by the way. Like some states are no longer offering state unemployment. And what we're seeing is there seems to be at least a little bit of increase in the number of folks returning to work in those states. It's not drastic, but it is there. So that tells me, yeah, that's definitely part of the spectrum, right? But it's
Mhm.
not the only problem. One of the big problems that a lot of people don't talk about because it's complicated, and it took me a long time to even be able to talk to you about it today. I'm not going to claim to be an expert, is what's called like labor churn. So this massive shakeup happens to the economy, the biggest like recession in history outside the Great Depression, and in some cases more drastic than the Great Depression. And the first ever like man-made shutdown of the economy, where we just shut the economy down on purpose because we made everybody stay home because of this pandemic. And so that's a drastic and massive shakeup of the status quo. So people are adaptable. People are like, okay, well, I've got this unemployment. I had no savings. I had, the average American household carries $10,000 in consumer credit card debt. I've got these bills that I could pay with this stimulus, and I've got my unemployment coming in that's actually a little bit more than I was making before, or at least keeping me stable. I'm going to pay off some of these bills. And some of the studies show that working class people actually did with the stimulus what they were supposed to do, more so than other groups of people.
Mhm.
So, and what I mean by that is like folks who made the income level to still get the stimulus, but didn't have to leave work. They could work remotely, or they were part of a work share program. Like those folks were the ones that socked that away in their savings account, or paid off, or like put something in their kid's college fund, or maybe like spent it on a consumer good, which is not a bad thing. Um, but the folks that are like in that working class that we're talking about, those frontline jobs, they're the ones who paid utility bills, paid back rent, paid back credit card bills, like paid car notes that had fallen behind, things like that. And so the more and more data that we're starting to get shows that like the lower you were on that wage spectrum, the better used that money was. It was meant to
Mhm.
be an economic stimulus and keep people afloat during these unprecedented times, and a
Right.
lot of that money went there. And so that's a big, so getting back to labor churn, that stimulus causes you to make all these life changes. Like, okay, I'm on unemployment now. I was working two retail jobs at 20 hours a week each for $11 an hour. And I was barely, and I have no benefits, and I'm barely making enough money to like keep all my stuff above water. So
And childcare.
yeah, oh yeah, like I'm not, dude, that's a whole nother conversation. Like, yeah, I mean, all those terrible, terrible costs that like working class families face that have again run away from inflation. Wages have not kept up with the increasing costs of all those metrics you want to name. Childcare is one of the biggest ones. Um, so they're like, okay, well, I'm going to change fields. I used to do retail, but now I'm going to see, I have a cousin in so and so town that does online sales and marketing. So I'm going to talk to them. And it turns out, as we all know, one of the big things that really did well during the pandemic was online retail. Like people were buying stuff without leaving their house. And so I'm using an anecdotal example, but there's data that backs this up. A lot of people changed the field of work they were in, and that's true for manufacturing, that's true for retail, and it's true for service industry jobs like food and hospitality.
Mhm.
So that's why you're seeing those industries, offering these big bonuses and these large wages, because the people that used to be there to work are working somewhere else. They're doing something different. Uh,
Mhm.
and then again, another big problem that's specifically hurting manufacturing and logistics, like warehousing and trucking, is they had an older than average workforce. And so a lot of those folks took this as an opportunity to retire, and they're not going to come back.
I want to get there, but just a second. Um, King Lance DeBoss. Now, I just I'm going to show the question, but the question is not meant for this show. The question is meant for the chamber. Okay. So I will get the chamber on. I see you. Okay. So that's not meant for this show. That's for Cindy, and I will get Cindy on. Okay. Okay. Now let's get back to the show. Jake, you just mentioned something about older workers that a lot of companies that we found out last week that a lot of companies don't want to hire older voters because A, they over experienced, B, that they might be leaving, they take the job but leave maybe only take it a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't want to take that opportunity when a lot of people need these older experienced workers.
Yeah, so what we're seeing right now is the opposite. So, I think during tougher job market times before that were sort of organic, like you'd see that where it's like, okay, well, you have people that have been driven out of a field, and then they go to a job that probably pays less and they're overexperienced and folks don't take them for all the reasons you just mentioned, Greg. What we're seeing now is due to the stimulus catching people up on some stuff and people having fear and anxiety about COVID, which is totally understandable, and then being of age and could go anytime anyway. A lot of folks in the manufacturing sector just chose to retire, and so that's why you're seeing a lot of those folks have issues in that sector. Like some of those folks aren't coming back, and so right now for those people that you were mentioning, where it's like, well, I'm an older worker and I'm pretty experienced. I haven't worked in this field in a long time. Those people could potentially make a killing right now because there's probably 20 shops in the city limits alone that would hire them if they chose to come back to that field. Now that's one point. The other point that I wanted to make is that these industrial companies right now, there's been a lot of tension socially, right? So manufacturing is an extremely white dominated field in pretty much everywhere, but especially in Michigan. And we're a diverse community. 35% of the people in this community plus are minority. And that stays pretty consistent with the labor force. So when I, anecdotally speaking, and I go out to shops over the course of the last several years, I've seen more and more diversity, which is positive. But the previous perceptions between the community and these workers or these employers has been negative, which I think has led probably some people away from pursuing those fields. And I can tell this right now to like any community looking, if you can like fog a mirror and have a beating heart, you can go get a job. So if people choose to go back to work, there are opportunities there. And our department is here to help people with those things, whether it's connecting them to previous guests you've had like Michigan Works, or actually knowing, because sometimes we do get shops that contact our office and say, hey, Jake, I need 10 people like yesterday and I can't find them. So yeah, always use us as a resource at the city. We're trying to connect people with ways to make their lives better.
Also, last week we talked about college people that were working not in the field that they graduated in, and they would say they were working at McDonald's, but they because of the pandemic, and then they come back and they say, I'm not going in that field. I want to find a job that I went to school for, and those people are not coming back to work so fast.
That's very true. Or they're working other stuff, like I mentioned. So like they might decide to do something that's more in line with their field of study, or just something they find more fulfilling than what they were doing before. That's that concept of labor churn, it's called. So something big happens in the economy, and all of a sudden a bunch of people that worked in this field no longer work in that field. And they either went to work somewhere else, or they retired, or they just have, for one reason or another, left that field. And like I mentioned, the ones where you're seeing, like, you go out to restaurants and they have signs up like, please excuse, if our food takes longer, we're short staffed. Or like, you see part-time like dishwasher positions being posted at $20 an hour. It's those folks are the ones that are being most impacted by that principle of labor churn, where like somebody that was working there before decided they found something that's different, that they either liked better or was more related to what they studied or what have you, and they're in a different field now. So okay. That's challenging.
A couple things. I did both. I paid down debt, took advantage of refi rates, spent some of the home improvement. Let me see. And actually, in the second half of the pandemic, spent more recreation activities I could do local.
Spent more recreation activities I could do local. Oh,
yeah.
Yep. And so I think that Facebook user tracks really well with some of the statistics that we were just talking about. So, folks at the beginning of the pandemic stabilized their households and then found there's all kinds of evidence pointing because you can actually watch like retail spending and consumer spending where it like fell off a cliff right after the pandemic. People started saving their money because it was so uncertain, right? I don't know if my job's going to come back. I don't know, I've got this stimulus coming, I'm hearing, but I don't know how many months of rent I'm going to have, so on and so forth. So like they held their money. And then once some of that stuff became a little bit clearer and there were these plans coming out for when people, when things could reopen, people gained a little bit more consumer confidence and then they started spending. So actually that comment makes a lot of sense. Like second part of the pandemic, I knew where my groceries were coming from. And so when I got stimulus or I went and stimulated the economy by doing local recreational activities that maybe I didn't do before.
And then when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. We refinanced as well during the pandemic, and it saved us as well. Another thing, Michael Anthony Smith, cities must generate more revenue in order to provide higher wages and city services.
Yep, that's true. I agree with that. So, a lot of folks, know that they pay taxes and then they assume that they see this tax bill that comes from the city and they think that mostly goes to the city, but that's actually inaccurate. So when you get your tax bill, the city treasurer in Michigan is responsible for collecting taxes for all taxing authorities, which can include and does include the county, the district library system, the community college, the local school district you're in, the city, and then any special millages. So, I agree that cities need to generate more revenue. I will also say that in Michigan, there are certain laws in place, and that's not why we're here today, but there are certain laws in place that make it very difficult for cities in Michigan to generate that revenue. And the Great Recession really caused a really negative impact on cities in Michigan, and we still haven't completely recovered from them. So the only real way for us to add a lot of revenue is to add new stuff in the cities, new housing, new commercial, new industrial.
Okay, King Lance the Boss. Why did 99% of the city contracts to white contractors? Why is there no diversity in construction, infrastructure, the economy system in Muskegon?
Yeah, that's a fair question that I agree with. The first part, I'm not 100% sure what that's referencing, the 99% of contracts going to white contracts. I don't know if it's like our house building contracts or what that may be. And I can speak to what we're doing a little bit. But as far as like why does the construction trades and other trades in general, why are they so heavily dominated by a Caucasian workforce? Again, it speaks back to that systemic and institutionalized racist policies over basically our entire history that have led to disparate economic outcomes in the job market, in people's ability to gain certain jobs, and in people's willingness to give them those jobs. So, that's a systemic issue. I think Muskegon is no different. I think we, have had those issues over years. And we're also, at least in the city where I work, we're making an effort to improve those outcomes. So that's that focus on economic equity that my department is really trying to expand on. We've proposed an economic equity commission, which would actually draw on marginalized populations from all over the city, create a new citizens commission to study some of those issues with experts coming in and, helping with some studies. They would also get to review upcoming and proposed developments in the city, which would be a positive because right now, not everybody gets a place at that table. That's very true. And then as to like the outcome, why are most contractors and most of those trades, awarded to Caucasian folks? It's probably fairly consistent with the statistics that are out there. That being said, the city does keep a list of minority contractors and reaches out to them for bid sheets. And even right now, we're building a series of homes in Jackson Hill on Leonard with a black contractor that we specifically sought out a development agreement with. So I think we are making strides.
Another question. Great point, Jake. And thanks for making it. The city on it collects, I think that's a kind of typo there,
Only
all the tax revenue. It doesn't keep all the revenue. Great clarification.
Yeah, the average tax bill in Michigan is like just under 60 mils or something. So 60 mils is $60 for every $1,000 of taxable value you have. So long story short, your home's worth $100,000. It's taxed at $50,000. 60 mils, 50 times 60 is your tax bill every year. So of those 60 mils, this city only collects like 12.45 or something like that. That's not the precise number, but it's not even close to a majority of that money goes to the city.
hmm Okay, now let's get back to the job thing. Their jobs. So many of our youth are graduating from college and leaving
Mhm.
when we need these individual back. What is it going to take to get these people now that there are job openings, but this job market is not going to always stay like this. What is it going to take to get these people back to Muskegon?
Sure. So some of that there's a multifaceted answer there, and I don't pretend to know the exact correct answer. Otherwise, I probably would have tried it already. But I
Mhm.
will say, you know, a lot of the jobs, the popular industries that are folks are studying. If you look at the statistics of what people are studying in college, they're highly tech heavy and healthcare heavy. So we're at an advantage there and a disadvantage. So the healthcare industry here has quickly become like the same level of employment in the public as manufacturing, and a lot of people don't know that. So a lot of folks have this memory of Muskegon as there were all these companies, Lakey Foundry and Continental Motors and Shaw Walker and Brunswick, and they hired thousands of people. And I always tell people like that's true, and that's really what helped build the middle class community here. And that's part, that commercial disinvestment is part of why we have some challenges. But I think one of the caveats to that people don't maybe always think about is we've also diversified our economy a lot compared to how we were. We were an
Mhm.
industrial town, point blank,
Right,
period. That's
right.
what that's what if you look at the data over time, the employment data, we were far and away industrial was a plurality of our positions. It's still higher than average for the state of Michigan, and still higher than average for the United States. It's about 16% of our employment base is manufacturing, which is healthy. That means one in every 6 or 7 jobs is a manufacturing job, and those are considered base jobs. They are generally consistent, full time with benefits. That's good. But healthcare has crept right up there, and it's also right around 16% of all the employment in Muskegon County is uh, healthcare jobs, and those are also
hmm
generally usually very stable. So
hmm
healthcare and tech are the two big fields of study. There's all kinds of other stuff. People are pursuing everything, but those are drivers of a post-industrial economy. And so
hmm
there's a few things we can do. One, we can really make this a quality of life focus. We can increase drastically the perceived quality of life here. A lot of young folks, and I'm born and raised here, just to kind of give some context. And a lot of my friends have left, and usually they left because the field of work that they studied was not available to them here. But
Right.
they liked it here. Most people that grow up here, I think, tend to like it here. But they want to do something else. And for those of them that grow up here and maybe don't like it here, I think a lot of that is perception, right? We do have core community issues that we need to take a look at. Inequities like we've talked about today, but also inequities when it comes to quality of life, which is why the city over the course of time, we're starting to increase our focus east, not just downtown, not just the beach. We put heavy investments in those. The market's kind of taking over in those. It's time to turn east and put heavy investments in every neighborhood. And we think if we do that, we'll create a high enough quality of life where folks will realize, like, I can get into tech and work remotely, or I can start my own tech company here, and I want to stay here because my cost of living is comparatively low and I have a high quality of life. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is, 80% of economic development is retaining and expanding the existing business base you have. So
hmm
if we continue to nurture those healthcare sectors, those trades and industrial sectors, which one of the commenters mentioned, is highly skewed towards one ethnicity in the workforce. We need to fix those problems. We need to make those trades and those manufacturing jobs available and accessible for everybody. And then I think
Exactly.
you will see more of those young people stay. And so that's a lot of stuff that our department is focused on. And you have to remember our department's pretty young. We started in March of 2019, and then the pandemic hit. So,
Right.
but that's to the city's credit, to the city commission's credit, to the manager's credit. They saw that this place was on track for growth, and they wanted to make sure everybody could grow with it who wants to. And I think
I,
that's good.
I think it's important, Jake, that you and the city has realized that systemic racism is real, does exist, and something has to happen about it.
Oh yeah, I think that's the general organizational culture here. I think if folks don't feel that way, they are probably an outlier, and I haven't heard that. So no, I said that even in my interview for this job. There was an interview panel, and I said, I care a lot about equity. It's one of the reasons that drew me to my old job, and that's going to be something that I'm going to pursue. And if that's not going to be a focus of the department that we're creating, then I'm probably not the best person. And so I took that as a positive that, they are, as an organization, interested in these principles and trying to create a more accessible and equitable local economy and local quality of life uh, when they hired me. And so we've kind of taken that ball and run with it as much as we can.
hmm Okay, so let's take that person out there that hasn't dipped their toes in the water yet, um, but needs to be successful. What jobs, you mentioned some like tech and healthcare, what jobs, or maybe I'm just starting, maybe I'm just coming out of high school. What are the trends that we're heading, like healthcare, and where are the trends where people should be looking to get employment, good employment?
Yeah. So those living wage jobs we talk about that provide, a quality lifestyle and can pay your bills, where you're not having to spend a stimulus check to just make sure you don't get evicted. Like,
Right.
yeah, I totally get what you're coming from. So I will say, and I'll speak out to the fact that the manufacturing base here has increased their average wages pretty drastically by since just in the last 5 years. So, and that's because prior to COVID, we had a labor shortage, kind of like we're seeing right now. So those jobs are getting better and better as far as wages. They're getting better and better as far as benefits. So those are viable options. And I will say this specifically to the minority community, young people in the minority community, like there is, as a previous commenter pointed out, a serious lack of tradespeople of color and a serious lack of folks with industrial and manufacturing experience that are of color. Generation by generation, it gets a little bit wider of a gap. And so I think if we could reverse that, that would be something that would be very viable. And that would create a great living wage for you right here in this town if this is where you want to stay.
Mhm.
But also you have to remember that like trades jobs are what we call highly transferable in the market. So like you can go if you're a plumber, you can go anywhere. Everybody needs a plumber.
Right.
If you're an electrician or a general contractor that builds residential homes, like there's a massive residential housing shortage. You can go anywhere and have a job. So
We need truck drivers bad.
Yep. So there's a huge trucking shortage. There's warehousing and logistics shortages. There's manufacturing shortages. There's every trade has a shortage. And there's great, strong union representatives and like all kinds of youth organizations that are trying to like point people towards those jobs. But what I really worry about is it's going to be the folks that are already resourced that like they were probably going to go to college and study anyway and become something, and then they change their mind and they become a tradesperson, which is great. What I worry about is that there's this huge untapped labor pool in Muskegon. I already mentioned we have a lower than average labor force participation rate. That's even more disparate in the minority community here. And I really worry that we're like wasting a lot of potential there because we're not reaching them. We're not doing the right things to reach them and point them in the direction and say this is a fantastic opportunity. We just need to give them what they need to be successful. And I don't necessarily have all the answers to what that is. But I'm happy to do what I can to take part in those conversations. But those trades are huge in the Muskegon area. And then, as I mentioned, healthcare here is a large scale. Anybody that goes to nursing school, there's a really good chance that you're going to be able to find a position here in the Muskegon area. At least that's been the experience based on the data that I can pull. And so, healthcare, industrial, trades, tech is always an option because you can usually work remotely. Just anecdotally, I have a friend who's born and raised here as well. Worked here locally as a web developer and then got a better job in Grand Rapids as a web developer. And then COVID hit and they stopped going to the office. And then they said, well, we're going to call everybody back. And him and a bunch of others said, well, we don't want to come back to the office. We're web developers. We like working remotely. We can do all of our work from home. And so they all were told, no, you have to come back. And they left. They went and got different jobs. So he now works for a company that's not even in this state.
Wow.
So, yeah. And he does exactly what he was doing before, just for a different company. And 2,000 miles away. So,
Right.
So tech is very versatile. You can live here and have the low cost of living and the high wages of the tech industry and have a really nice life for yourself as a young person. That's for sure.
I want to talk to you about two things as time is winding. Wow, fast.
Yeah.
I was a coach, a college coach, a couple years ago, and it was very obvious that some of the kids that I was coaching, they really didn't need to go to college. That there are great jobs and great fields out there. How important is it to let us know that every child is not meant, or every adult is not meant for college, and there are great jobs out there that they can, how about work or start a business yourself.
Yeah, I think you're making a great point. So the proof is in the pudding. So absolutely every single university knows that a certain percentage of folks that they accept are not going to graduate. They all have a dropout rate, right? It's college. Not everybody graduates when they go. So what that results in, because of the way college works here, is usually those, not always, but usually those folks that didn't graduate end up with student debt. They end up with usually years where they could have been working a full-time job like in industrial or manufacturing or the trades, and kind of getting themselves set up and started, and now they have to kind of start from scratch, and they're saddled with debt. And so it does happen. College was right for me. It's not right for everybody, and it's absolutely appropriate to tell folks like it's not the only path. I graduated high school in 2008 from a public school here, and it's not the fault of these folks, because at the time that's what the economists and that's what everything looked like. They were like beating it into our heads like these industrial jobs are going away. Like you need to go to a 4-year college. You don't go to a 4-year college, you're going to starve. And like it was drastic. It was heavy pressure. Like you need to go to college. You need to go to college. And I think it's different out there now. I think a lot of folks are starting to realize that that was a bad strategy. Probably sometime along the time where student debt exceeded credit card debt as the largest debt holder in the United States. People might have realized like, oh man, maybe we shouldn't be sending every single kid to college. So that I think there is positive momentum on that, but I think we need to set up more opportunities for folks to get into the trades. Me today, if I lost my job today and had to start fresh on Monday, I would, as the economic development director, I would only know some of the ways that I could get into the trades. I know I don't know all of them. So how can I expect a kid fresh out of high school to know them? So I think it's an access and communication issue to make sure kids know, like you said, like college isn't the only path you have to having a quality life.
Okay. What is the city doing about as we're looking at the Chavez case and stuff like that? What is the city doing about their hiring process when it comes down to police and fire?
Derek Chauvin, is that who you mean?
Yeah, Derek Chauvin.
Today, the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah, which I'm watching right now.
Okay, yeah. So I'm probably not the best person to speak to that because I'm not the public safety director. That's Jeff Lewis. But I can tell you that I know that the city of Muskegon has been doing psychological exams for several years now on applicants, and I've heard positive feedback from our leadership as to that. And then obviously before COVID, we had citywide mandatory diversity, equity, inclusion training. I know those guys take all kinds of trainings on de-escalation, and I think one thing that Director Lewis has done well is that he's set up lines of communication between the city's police force and the residents. And so I don't know how many changes have been made since that incident happened necessarily, but I do know, and I do know one big thing that's changing for us is we are finally getting body cameras on all officers. I think 70 brand new body cameras are coming into City Hall if they're not here already. So that is a change, and that was led by some of these incidents that have taken place. George Floyd is one of many, obviously, but so yeah, I think that the police department seems to be trying to do the right thing, and I think if folks out in the community feel like there's more work to be done, I think Director Lewis and the city manager are folks that want to hear from them.
I want to thank you for wearing that. I know that's a different field, but I want to thank you for answering that question. Let's talk about your field and what you do.
Sure. Yep. So I'm the director of economic development here for the city. Primarily, my role is to kind of chart our overall economic development strategy and course. Keep my finger on the pulse of the companies, how they're doing, who's hiring, who's struggling, and kind of paint a picture with that combined with all sorts of other data metrics that some of them we pay for and some of them are publicly available. And also to make sure that we are encouraging like a high quality of life for our residents through residential investment, residential reinvestment, and then weighing in also on other things like infrastructure and parks amenities, things like that. I think right now the city just recently installed new playground equipment at Amont Park, and we're working on Reese and Bucama too. And I think we're putting another like $900,000 worth of improvements into those parks. And that was, fortunately, we all work really collaboratively here at the city, and those are conversations that economic development got to participate in. And we're talking right now about some pretty large scale housing developments and commercial developments, mostly around the waterfront near downtown. And that's stuff that we invite Public Works to because we all kind of work together. So, I'm the economic development side of things, but the city is a public service organization. And everybody that I've worked with here has had a real heart for it, which has been nice.
Jake, how does someone get a hold of you? Like King Lass, the boss, he has got a lot of stuff to say, but there are a lot of people that have some questions. How can they reach you and talk to you directly?
Sure. Yep. So the best way to get a hold of me is via email, just because as I just mentioned, a big part of my job is like working with companies and schools and housing developers. So I'm in and out all the time. My email is jake.atcombe, so first name, last initial, at shorelinecity.com. And I'll send that to you guys in an email so that you can post it on your social media.
Okay.
I'm happy to talk to any citizens or listeners that want to ask more questions because, again, like this is a public service organization, and I feel like a lot of times folks don't think they're getting all the information deliberately, when in reality it's just the lines of communication are not reaching them, and I'd rather that it did.
Quick question. How do you feel COVID has changed the workforce, and will that workforce ever look like it did before COVID?
It has changed the workforce fairly drastically because, like I said, not only are there, as of now, fewer people in it, that may recover. I think if you can continue to see upward pressure on wages, and we can make sure that inflation doesn't get out of control, that'll bring people back into the workforce. Like eventually, money talks, right? So, like if this job that used to pay 12 now it pays 17, just anecdotally, that's 10 grand more a year. Yeah, okay, I can come to work for that. Like, so that, those are those decisions that people make. As I said, one of the toughest thing in economics is people are adaptable. People almost never do exactly what we think and expect they're going to do as a group. And so economics is one of those soft sciences where it's part people and it's part numbers. And so I don't know that it's ever going to look exactly the same because of that labor churn we discussed, where folks just changed what they do for a living now and they may not come back. And so it's going to look a little different. I think you also pushed a lot of folks into retirement due to COVID that were on their way to retiring anyway. So that probably hastened sort of a younger group coming into the workforce. And because that was something we were also contending with pre-COVID, is you had folks that wanted to enter the labor force, and they, in their field, they felt they were having a difficult time because a lot of folks that could retire were staying in. So, you used to see a lot of that in like some of the trades in construction and manufacturing. Like, I want to get to this head maintenance person job, but I've been on assembly for 3 years because so-and-so's not retiring. We would hear that kind of stuff anecdotally all the time, but there's some data that bears it out where now you're going to see people have some upward mobility because a lot of folks retired probably due to COVID.
All right, last word to you, Jake. State of the Union, Muskegon, job-wise, and how are we looking overall?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question because the jobs are there. Like I said earlier, like it's kind of a joke that I use all the time. If you can fog a mirror, I can find you a job. like
Okay.
If you're breathing, I can get you a job. But there's all kinds of underlying issues that we've got that have persisted for a long time, and they're due to some of those systemically racist policies and practices that our society and really American society has troubled us with. So I hate terms like skills gap and things like that, but what we've really had is like an opportunity gap where a big part of our labor
There you
force,
go.
yeah, they're a big part of our labor force hasn't necessarily had the opportunity to try for these things. And I think some of that's starting to change. We're going to continue to push that change and, be an ally to those conversations. And I think overall, I think the future is bright. I think we're a well-diversified local economy. I think we're in the right tertiary market where like we're next to Grand Rapids, which is the fastest growing city in Michigan. And then we're just north of Ottawa County, which is the fastest growing county in Michigan. And what we're starting to notice, especially when it comes to like development, is people are getting priced right out of those games and they're coming to play here, which is fantastic because that provides a lot of opportunities to local businesses and local entrepreneurs to find their way in. I can tell you lots of examples where a local Muskegon business has partnered with out of town money to get themselves going. And that's like a positive side effect of us kind of being the third biggest in this three market area. So
All right.
I'm optimistic overall.
All right. Thank you, sir. We really appreciate it. And again, you have anytime you want to come on and update us, feel free.
Sure. I'm always happy to talk.
All right. You've been watching Jake Echolm from the city of Muskegon. It's torn in two. Thank you guys so much for the questions. Listen, King Lance DeBass, and Michael Anthony Smith, and all you guys, feel free, get involved like you are, and answer, demand answers to questions. And I'm glad that Jake realized that there's a systemic problem in Muskegon County, and that has to change. My name is Gregory T. Roberts. This is Torn in Two. I'll see you next week live. Take care, and God bless.
The wait is over. The all-new Umoja Radio Network, home to over 40 Black-owned radio stations and podcasts, is here for you. Connect to the world's fastest-growing collection of unapologetically Black and proud media, from podcasts to independent Black-owned radio stations, and access to the important news and music you need. Umoja Radio is from our culture, by our culture, for our culture. The all-new Umoja Radio is available right now on Google Play and the Apple Store. Join the